Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's admissions essay masterclass, focusing on the INSEAD and London Business School essays. My name is Caroline Diarte Edwards. I am a co-founder and director at Fortuna Admissions, and I'm joined today by my wonderful colleagues, Melissa Jones and Cassandra Pittman. I am having some technical issues, so I've passed the slide control over to Cassandra. So Cassandra, please could you go to the next slide? Thank you. So to introduce ourselves briefly, so I was head of admissions at INSEAD for several years. I also did my MBA at INSEAD. And then 11 years ago, left the school and started up Fortuna Admissions with two colleagues. And I have had the great pleasure of working with Cassandra and Melissa for several years as we were colleagues at INSEAD in marketing and admissions. And then they took the leap and joined me at Fortuna. And so they are coaches with a lot of experience of working with people applying to INSEAD, London Business School, as well as all of the top schools, in fact. So Cassandra, as well as having worked at INSEAD, has also worked in admissions at London Business School. And when she left us at INSEAD, she went on to do her MBA at Columbia. So she has really interesting perspective of having experienced the inside track of MBA programs, both internationally and in North America. So moving on to introducing a little bit about the context of who we are at Fortuna. So if you go to the next slide, please. Cassandra, so as I mentioned, we started Fortuna 11 years ago, and the goal was really to bring together a team of people who understand the inside track of how admissions works. So we have a wonderful team now of coaches who have worked at all of the top schools, both in North America and internationally. So all of the schools that you see listed there on the page, as well as a bunch of other schools. And so we coach people through the very intense and competitive process of applying to MBA programs, as well as executive MBA programs, masters in finance, masters in management, and so on. And we are focusing, as I said, today on INSEAD and London Business School. But if you would like to connect with us to discuss your application for other schools, we would be delighted to do that. And if you're considering international schools, then you may well also be considering schools like the business schools at Oxford or Cambridge or HEC Paris or ESA or many of the other great schools, IMD and so on. And we also work all the time with candidates applying to those programs. So we don't have time to delve into the nitty-gritty of their essays today, but we do love chatting with candidates who are thinking about applying or perhaps who have already started down the road of applying and have some particular challenge and they would like to have a chat with someone. We're really thrilled to do free consultation. So if you have not already reached out to Fortuna, please do so. You can reach us at the email address on the screen, or you can also sign up for free consultation on our website, fortunaadmissions.com. All right, so diving into the agenda for today. So what we're going to talk about, we really want to get into the nitty-gritty and give you some practical advice on how to tackle the admissions essays for these schools. And first of all, we want to set the context a little bit. Why do the schools have essays? Why do they want information beyond your CV or your resume? Why do they need more than the facts and figures of your academic and professional accomplishments? And then we will walk you through each of the essays and give you some of our key tips for tackling each of those. And we will talk about some of the questions you may have. So for example, most MBA applications, including London Business School and INSEAD, have optional essays, and candidates are often not sure how to tackle those and whether they should use that space or not. So we're going to talk about whether you should use that space and in what circumstances you should use it and what the kind of things you should talk about. We will talk about short answer questions. So I think about some of those as sort of mini essays that are often embedded in application forms. So in this case, we'll talk about that in the context of the London Business School application, but it's often the case for many other schools as well, that they will have short answer questions that should not be neglected in the application forms. And I think sometimes candidates don't pay enough attention to those responses and may spend a lot of time thinking through very carefully how to respond to their formal essays, but those questions are often just as important as the actual essays. So we want to pay some attention to that today. And we would love to get some questions from you. So please feel free at any time to shoot us some questions. There's a Q&A function in the Zoom. So please type in your questions at any point, and we hope to be able to go through those. We may be able to get to some of them during the discussion, and if not, then we will get to them at the end of today's session. Okay, so that's our plan of attack. So we will get started then. So moving on to the next slide, please, Cassandra. What are the schools looking to learn from your essays? So as I mentioned, the schools are asking for a lot more than just your CV, and they could just judge you on your GMAT, your CV, your recommendation letters, but they ask for essays, right? And so it can seem like a big hoop to jump through. It requires quite a bit of effort, and I think it's useful to think about what it is that they're looking for, why it is that they're asking you to do these essays. It's not just an exercise for the sake of it to make you work extra hard to apply to the school. Melissa, could you tell us a bit about, from the INSEAD perspective, what is it that the admissions committee is looking to learn about candidates from the essays?
Sure. So yeah, INSEAD is one of those schools that has some of the most essay questions in any MBA application compared to a lot of US schools. So there's 4 career-related essays and 3 on your motivations, which are more on the personal side, and then 2 optional essays. So 9 in total. But so to me, having more essays is almost better, as you get a chance to convey multiple dimensions of who you are, and really tell your story and showcase what you've done in your life, personally, professionally. Whereas in schools that just offer 1 essay or 2, it's kind of hard to, people struggle as to what should I really put in these essays and what does admissions really want to hear. So with these 9 essays in mind, INSEAD's looking for how you fit into their criteria. And LBS has very similar criteria. So, one of them being your leadership potential. The second is that you're fit for the school and what you bring to the classroom and community. And the third is being your international motivation and experience. So you really need to be showing concrete examples that illustrate these key criteria throughout all of your essays, as they're really looking for a cohesive story of who you are beyond the facts and figures of your resume and what makes you tick.
Yeah, absolutely. Cassandra, anything that you would add to that from the London Business School perspective?
Yeah, I would say, just zooming out a little bit, what I like to say to clients is your work experience and your GMAT scores, your GRE scores, all of that stuff that's the basic that you mentioned, Caroline, that's your ticket to play the game. And then your essays and the other things that are more your narrative, that's actually how you play the game on the pitch. And so I really want to echo Melissa's comments to say this is an opportunity to tell your story. Now with LBS, it's deceptive because it looks like, well, they just have 1 essay, right? This is an easy application compared to INSEAD. But actually, it's about 3,000 words by the time you add all of the open-ended questions. We call them mini essays in the application, plus the main essay, And then here's a top tip for LBS. We always suggest that you use the optional essay. And that's advice that that differs a lot of times from the US schools.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you. Great context for candidates to keep in mind before you tackle the essays. And I think, you know, it's important to understand what it is the schools are looking to learn from your essays before you dive in and start putting pen to paper. So now we wanted to walk through the INSEAD essays, and there are several INSEAD essays. So what we thought we would do is give one key tip for each essay, and we could probably, you know, spend an hour discussing each essay individually, but as we haven't got time for a marathon session today, we thought that we would focus on a key tip here. And so I'm going to start with, so with INSEAD, you have the motivation essays and the career questions, and we're going to start with the motivation essays. And so Melissa, I would like you to start with the candidate description essay, please. So that's often my favorite essay to read, asking candidates to essentially describe themselves in 500 words. And I've seen some people really tie themselves up in knots doing that. So what is your top tip?
Sure, I'll just share the essay question specifically. So they say, give a candid description of yourself, stressing the personal characteristics you feel to be your strengths and weaknesses, and the main factors which have influenced your personal development, giving examples when necessary. So yeah, this is definitely, you know, the toughest and longest essay for INSEAD, and the one where you can use a bit more creativity. I think this is probably the most important essay too. So please make sure you go beyond the professional and academic side and really focus on your personal journey. So you want to tell a story here. Personally, I find chronological order can help. So I find that in this essay can tend to be 3 to 5 paragraphs. So, you know, as a suggestion, you know, start with your upbringing, you know, start from the beginning and then, you know, walk us through your life essentially. So talk about your background, how and where you grow up, maybe your values, someone that inspired you, is it your mother, father, grandparents, or, you know, what or who has shaped you today. And then in each of the little stories, each paragraph, you intertwine your strengths or a weakness in that story so that the strengths, you can show the strengths that have derived from that experience or from that person. Yeah. I could go on and on about this essay, but I'll leave it at that as one tip.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, thank you. So the next essay then, Cassandra, for you, the example of achievement and an example of failure. So could you give us your key tip or your top tips for tackling that question, please?
Yeah, so my number one top tip for this question is own your failure and make it a big one. So the most common mistake that I see people making is, you know, trying to, you know, rush through their failure in 3 sentences and really spend all of the word count on the success, or trying to pick a failure that isn't really a failure, or, you know, was kind of inconsequential. The objective of this question as it relates to the failure is, are you self-aware enough to know that you have failed? And are you mature enough to learn from that failure and apply that learning going forward? And so here is an opportunity for you to dig a little deeper, be a little bit vulnerable, and own that failure.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And actually some of the best applications I've read have had the most dramatic and terrifying stories of failure in them. So it's a very good point that it's important not to shy away from that part of the question. All right. So the next question then for you, Melissa, is the extracurricular question.
Yeah. So they want you to share, you know, other things in your life on the personal side, hobbies or sports or what have you. So generally, I suggest to people to structure this around, usually ends up being around 3 or 4 paragraphs. So the first, how I like to structure it, which I think is a nice balance, is maybe 1 paragraph around your undergraduate experience, school involvement, because they would see it that if you got involved in your undergrad or a master's program, then perhaps you would get involved at INSEAD. Second paragraph could be around volunteering, community experience, and the third around hobbies. So it can be from when you were younger or something a little bit more current, but don't forget to include why you were enriched by all of those activities and why you got involved in the first place.
Great, great, very clear. Thank you, Melissa. So Cassandra, then moving on to the career questions from INSEAD. So the first one is the current job description. So what do you advise candidates on that question?
So again, I'm gonna zoom out just a little bit here and just remind candidates that the admissions committee will already have your resume, but your resume, you have to fit everything that's important about your work experience on one page, in usually really succinct bullets, right? This is your opportunity to contextualize what you do and the impact that you have, as well as explain things to the admissions committee that they might not know. So, if you're a consultant already and you work for, McKinsey or Bain, I can tell you that the admissions committee knows about your title, understands what a consultant is or what an analyst is. But there are a lot of people coming from non-traditional backgrounds where the admissions committee might not know the jargon, might not know the acronyms that you use. And this is your opportunity to contextualize that a little bit, tell the story, and really focus on the impact that you've had.
Great. Yeah, absolutely. Don't just repeat what you've already given them in the resume. And I think that's a good point as well, just generally across the application. You don't need to repeat information, but think about how the different pieces of the puzzle that you're putting together complement each other. Okay, so the next question then for you, Melissa, is next step. So what is your next step if you were to stay with your current employer?
Yeah, so this so try not to overthink this one. This essay can be, even though they give you 200 words, it can be quite short. So you really just are simply stating where you see yourself going. So, will you have a promotion in 6 months or a year? And then if you would be in that next position, what's the title of that position? What are the new responsibilities that go under that new role? And also it's great to highlight here if you would be managing or leading others. So it's like I said, it's quite simple. So don't overthink that. And often I find people just use around 100 words or so for that.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds good. And then the next one, Cassandra, is please describe your career to date. So your career evolution.
Yes. So I think the temptation with this question for a lot of people is just to talk about what they've done. But there's a really important part of this question, which is also explain the motivations behind these decisions. And that's actually what this question is getting at. Again, remember, they already have your resume. They already see the job titles that you've had before. This is your opportunity to explain not the what, but the why. Why did you choose to change companies 2 years in? Why did you get promoted, 3 times if you stayed in the same company? All of that, so that they really understand that what your driving narrative is, and later how that fits into your goals and where you're going.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay, and then the final question then for you, Melissa, is on career goals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the question is, so discuss your short and long-term career aspirations with an MBA from INSEAD. So this essay question is actually quite tricky because it's only 100 words, so it doesn't give you much space. So that said, you need to keep it extremely brief, to the point, and don't necessarily worry about talking about why you need an MBA or how INSEAD will help you, as there simply isn't the space to write that, even though the wording of this question makes it seem like you need to answer that. So start with kind of maybe an introduction, like a passion on what you want to do, what impact you want to make on the community, on an organization or the world, kind of just a brief statement, and then perhaps then dive into, one line on your short-term goal, but try and be as specific as you can, use an example title or example, a couple of companies or two that you're interested in working for, possibly geographic location, and then one short sentence on your long-term goals.
Caroline, I wonder if we can ask you a question related to
Yeah,
this.
of course.
I think our attendees will notice that that INSEAD is really unique in not probing too much your career goals and what you intend to do with the MBA. I know you had a very strong hand in this iteration of the application, and I'm wondering why you think that is.
Yeah, well, they have shortened that particular question, and I know that the length of that particular question is of great frustration to Melissa, for example, because it's often difficult, right, to express your plans for your entire post MBA life in 100 words. It would be much easier to do it in 400 or 500 words than 100 words. So I think, partly it was, so that length is partly driven by the fact that at one point they were looking to cut down the overall length of the application in an effort to make it less intimidating and just to simplify that. And also keeping in mind that they will probe career goals at the interview stage. So they just want to get a sense from the written application of what is the direction that you want to head in. You don't have to give them a lot of elaboration, but you will have to elaborate in more detail at the interview stage. So they try to take out some of the overlap between the written application and the interview stage, so that they're not asking you to sort of repeat the same things at both stages. So that's an important thing to keep in mind, is that even though it's a very short question in the written application, sometimes candidates then fall into the trap of not giving enough thought to their career goals, and then they struggle at the interview stage because they will get grilled on their career goals and they will have to explain it in much more detail at that point. And so even though you don't have to give a lot of detail in the written application, you definitely should do plenty of research. You should think through your plans very carefully. You should think through, what is the logical thread? How am I building on my skills pre-MBA? How will that MBA provide me a platform? What is my short-term plan, my medium-term plan, my long-term plan, even knowing that that is going to evolve, right? But what the school sees is that, and I saw that when I was working at the school, that candidates who are able to articulate a clear career plan in their application, even though they may completely change that and throw that plan out the window during the program, because it is a very transformative experience and people will often get inspired to do very different things during the program. The fact that they are able to articulate a plan and defend it at interview stage means that they are more likely than someone who's not able to do that to then be able to reformulate a plan and get into gear quickly if they decide to change that plan during the program and be successful with their job search. So don't be fooled by that 100-word limit, because they will be probing you more on those career plans. And it does seem a bit counterintuitive sometimes, because of course, everybody knows that your career plans may well change. And God knows it does for most people. I mean, my own career plans in my INSEAD application had absolutely nothing to do with what I ended up doing post MBA. So, and I'm sure that's true for many people. But anyway, it's something that they want you to explain. All right, and so before we move on to the next slide, actually we have a question that's popped up in the Q&A, and it's a question going back to, you had discussed how to tackle weaknesses and failures, Cassandra. So there's a question here: what weaknesses to highlight in essays without conflicting with the narrative that's been laid out? Is being emotional a no weakness if someone just wanted to be honest with a weakness question? So I think, weaknesses are often tricky, right? Because people don't want to torpedo their application by owning up to something that sounds completely dreadful. But at the same time, I think usually candidates err on the side of thinking that they need to look too perfect. And as you said, Cassandra, it's actually really important to be humble and acknowledge that no one is perfect. And if you're applying to business school, for sure you have opportunities for development, and hopefully business school can help you along that path. So what are your thoughts about sort of coherence in narrative?
Is that to me?
Yes, yeah, if you wouldn't mind taking that.
Yeah, I would just say to build on that. You know, I'm a few years post MBA now. I think, you know, over a decade. I know you are as well, Caroline. And this ability to introspect and say, what am I doing well? Where could I do better? And how am I going to get better is so critical for your long-term success to be a leader in whatever field that is, whether it's an entrepreneur or you know, in industry or anything else you're doing. And so this is really, again, what the schools are looking for. So I struggle with words like emotional, because I could have a definition of what it means to sound emotional in an essay, and you might have a completely different idea of what that means. So I'm going to, you know, maybe not suggest the word emotional, but I am going to suggest the word introspective and a little bit vulnerable. It should feel a little bit uncomfortable. It should feel like, oh, you know, this isn't something that I would just, you know, write on my resume as a selling point, but really show that you have that depth as a leader and as a person to learn, change, and grow throughout your life and career.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, you know, it's important to be genuine. And I think, you know, Cassandra, Melissa, and I have seen way too many applications where people say that their weakness, their fault is being a perfectionist and driving themselves too hard. And that is such a frequent thing that comes up in business school applications. Because I guess people think that it makes them sound kind of good, that you drive yourself too hard and you're a perfectionist. So it's kind of not really a weakness. I guess that's why they're stating that as their weakness, because they think it makes them look good. So a bit of honesty and humility here goes a long way.
I will also just say, I hope this isn't too off script, but having played around with it a little bit, I can tell you categorically, do not ask ChatGPT to suggest your weaknesses. It will be the most generic, worst idea, I promise you.
Another tip too on that, not the chat one, but on the weaknesses and how, you know, sometimes it can feel awkward to, you know, talk about your strengths and then flip to some weakness that might not be related. And sometimes it doesn't necessarily have to relate, but to make it a bit more cohesive, a tip could be, you know, I'm going to make up some, hard to do on the spot, but a strength could, let's say you're one of these people that moved around a lot, different countries, you schooled abroad or worked abroad. And so one of your strengths because of that is being really adaptable. And then on the flip side of that, because you've moved around so much, maybe you have some trouble with like, you know, maintaining connections or something like that. You know what I mean? So it still ties into the same theme, but it's you're just using the flip side of a strength to showcase that weakness, if that makes sense.
That works so well for INSEAD's essay, actually. And I think for most of us, our best strengths are our weaknesses. I mean, it applied in a different context. So
yeah, there's always a flip side. For sure. Great. Okay, so if you could move us on to the next slide, please, Cassandra. And I believe we are on to the London Business School essay. So London Business School, as you mentioned earlier, has one primary essay. So could you tell us a bit about that essay, Cassandra, and what are your key tips for tackling it?
Yes. So this is an essay that you don't want to overthink. LBS wants you to answer this question directly, succinctly within the word limit, and really make the case between what you've done previously in your career, what you want to do post MBA and how LBS is going to help get you there. And that middle, or that last part that I said, that is going to be the joining between what you want to do post MBA and what you do now, is where I think people sometimes don't emphasize enough. So here's where you really want to show, I'm not just going to say your LBS research, of course that needs to come through. So make sure you know the website inside and out, but do research that's much more in depth. Talk to graduates, talk to current students, talk to club leaders that you're interested in, and attend the admissions events, et cetera. Work with somebody who knows LBS super well. But not just your research needs to come through, but like your love of the school needs to come through. And that line between your past and your future and how LBS is uniquely positioned to help make that career change happen needs to come through. And this is one of those areas, like Caroline said a little bit, I see some parallels between the INSEAD, where you will look, my career goals might change. Your career goals might change. Everybody knows that. Equally, the open secret is, you might want LBS. You might also be applying to 3 or 4 or 5 other schools. And the truth is, we know that those other schools can also help you. Don't worry about that. In this essay, make the case and make the reader believe that LBS is truly your one and only school that will really set you up for success with what you want to do in the future.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I think that's an interesting difference between the London Business School and the INSEAD applications, because that's something that, as you say, it's really important to articulate on paper in that written application for London Business School. But INSEAD actually doesn't ask about that, and they don't need you to write about that in the written application. But that is important, I think, that it comes through in your interview. So don't think that it's not important to show your motivation for the school if you're applying to INSEAD. It's just that you express it at a different stage with INSEAD than London Business School.
I just wanted to add too, I like what Cassandra said about talking with students that are currently there. These things are always changing in every program, new clubs or new initiatives or what have you. And, stuff that might not be on the website or presented in an information session. So, I've worked with people in LBS before that when they've had a conversation with a few students and they got all of this kind of insider information and new things. And then they used a lot of what they learned on those phone calls in the essays. So you get, the most current recent information on what's going on behind the scenes.
Yeah. And all those conversations, I think, for whichever school you're applying, we would encourage you to engage in those sorts of discussions with members of the community, because even if you don't have to write about it, for example, as I said, you don't have to write about that for the INSEAD application. It just gives you a much stronger sense of what the school is about and a better sense of your fit with the school. And at some stage, you will need to express that. So whether it's in the written application or at the interview stage, you need to have done that research, have engaged with the community, and have had those conversations to really understand what it is that you're going to get from the program and what you can bring to the program. And it's great to hear different people's perspectives, because everyone has a different experience at a school and will have had a different path through a school. So we would definitely encourage you to speak to as many students and alumni as you can. All right, so moving on, please, Cassandra, to the next question. All right, so this is always an interesting one. Optional essays. So when should you use the optional essay? So Melissa, could you get us started on that, please?
Sure. So INSEAD asks if there's anything else that's not covered in your application that you would like to share with the admissions committee. So I would only use this if you didn't have the opportunity already from the 7 to 9 essays above, if you weren't able to share something above. So kind of leave this one to the end. So examples could be, choice of your recommenders. So a lot of people don't use their current supervisors. So this could be a place to mention that. Maybe it's a side hustle, something entrepreneurial that you're doing that you didn't quite put it on your resume because it's just too new or it just didn't flow well. Maybe it's certain awards or honors that you've received that you want to elaborate more on. But a lot of people also use it on justifying their quantitative skills. For if your GMAT score, the quant score was a bit on the lower side. So for LBS, they, as Cassandra mentioned, there's the one main essay, and then it looks like there's only 2 essays, which is the optional one. They ask pretty much the same thing as INSEAD. As Cassandra mentioned too, that, definitely recommend to use this essay. But first, Cassandra mentioned that there's all these little mini essays within the application form. So generally I suggest to do those first and then see, what's missing. What did I not get to share? So you probably don't want to use this essay on justifying your GMAT score as there's actually a question in the form on that. But maybe here you do mention that side hustle or that entrepreneurial thing you're doing on the side. But essentially what makes a really strong essay here, in our opinion, is mentioning, how you can contribute to LBS. So as an example, maybe you've been really involved in the community or like the LGBTQ plus community, and you've been volunteering, doing your time, doing, X, Y, and Z. You could write about that here and then tie it into LBS. So, saying that you see yourself really getting involved or perhaps leading the Out in Business Club, or perhaps you do a lot of volunteer mentoring, and how if you attend LBS, you see yourself mentoring others and being a really active alumni member. So that kind of thing. So it's really an opportunity to reveal more about yourself and what you have done by tying it back into the school and how you will contribute.
So what I like to, just to add on that, what I like to do so often, I know INSEAD and LBS kind of don't like this, but it's true. So often candidates who are applying to LBS are also applying to INSEAD and vice versa. And if that's the case, if I'm working with a client who is applying to both schools, I will almost inevitably say, let's start with the INSEAD application because it's so wordy. And I really like to use the candid description essay from the INSEAD application as inspiration for this essay.
Yes, I fully agree with that.
You can't just copy and paste it because everybody at LBS knows what the application is at INSEAD and they will not like that. But for me, it's such good inspiration to use to really say, like, who am I really, and how is this fitting into the LBS fitting into my overall narrative as a person, not just my career goals. And then I did want to make one other point, because this is a really tactical point. You can cut this essay up. So for example, let's say you want to explain a career gap that you had, and you only need 1 or 2 lines to do that, or you want to explain a bad GMAT, a less than ideal GMAT. You can just put bullets you can write an essay of, let's say, 400 words and then put bullets for the remaining bit. So don't think that you just need to take this as one topic either. You can address several different things in the 500 words that they give you.
Yes, good point.
Great. I love that tip of leveraging the candid description essay. Yeah. And I also often, if I'm working with candidates applying to multiple schools, I think the INSEAD application is often a great foundation for multiple other applications, because you can cover so much ground with that INSEAD application. So
absolutely,
it serves multiple purposes. All right, so moving on then to the short answer questions, which are somewhat like mini essays that are sometimes sort of hidden away in the application form. And so this is particularly the case, as we mentioned, for London Business School. So Cassandra, could you give us some tips, please, for tackling those?
Yes, so there are a number of these questions, everything from, do you feel your past academic performance is a good indicator for your ability to succeed on the program, to have you discussed your MBA plans with your relatives and close friends, and if so, what was their reaction, to what sorts of extracurricular things have you been involved in. So it's hard to have a unified single tip for all of these individual questions. If I had to have one, I would say, don't be fooled. They are essay questions. Even if they don't look like essay questions, you need to be thinking of them as essay questions. And so what does that mean? That means really thinking through your narrative and how you tell the story. All pieces of your information, all pieces of information on your application, you're going to want to fit like a Lego project and into your overall narrative, but you want to tell the story well. You usually want to use narrative form. There's one exception to that, again, a tactical tip here, which is they ask a question about your international experience. And I have found that that question specifically can be answered either in narrative paragraph form, telling usually the depth of like one experience that was really transformative for you, or as a bullet list of all the different international experience you've had, if you've had like lots of international postings or, you know, lived in several different countries. Other than that, these really, each individual question should really be an essay question that you really tell a cohesive story for.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. All right. Okay. So I think those are, that's it with the points that we wanted to go through. So Cassandra, you could just go to the last slide and then we're going to move on to some of the questions from the audience.
Q&A here, yeah.
Oh, sorry, I can't. I need to minimize something on my screen. Sorry, if you could just go to the other slide that flashed up for a moment. Yeah. So before we go into the Q&A, I just wanted to say that we have. So this is the last in a series of 4 sessions that we've done on admissions essays. So we have done 3 other sessions in previous weeks, and these are available on YouTube. So please do view those sessions. And as I said earlier, we'd be delighted to have a chat with you about your application and about your candidacy. And you can ask us any question that you like about your plans and ask for feedback, ask for our opinion. We would be thrilled to have a chat with you. So you can sign up for a free consultation. You can ping us at info@fortunaadmissions.com or sign up on our website. So having said that, I am now going to jump into the Q&A. So we have a question here about reapplicant essays. So Melissa or Cassandra, do either of you have any particular tips for tackling reapplicant essays?
Sure. Sure. Yeah. So there's a few things to consider. So I know you don't always get feedback on maybe why you weren't admitted in the first place. If you can reach out to admissions, you might get lucky and get a little bit of feedback. It might have been a GMAT score, for example. They do often reveal that kind of information. So if that's the case, if you've retaken a test, it's a great place to include like the new test score to show some improvement. Also things at work. So have you had any recent promotions, or if you have another promotion, new responsibilities, leadership of others, a new interesting project, maybe it's something abroad, engaging with more, something that has more international scope. So that's something on the professional side, also on the extracurricular side. So are you engaged more in a certain activity? Have you taken a leadership role? Would also look really great. Maybe it's some more volunteering. So things like that, anything that's kind of new that's happened in that past year, you definitely want to highlight for them.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I would say if you submit the same application, you're probably going to get the same outcome. So do think about how you can show evolution since you previously applied. Okay, so next question. Is it okay to have an average post-MBA goal, such as career advancement, change of geography, or working in a new challenging environment? Or is it more valued if the goals are greatly impactful to the world? Cassandra, could you take that one?
So I want to reframe average, because pretty much everybody's career goals can fit into advancing their career, pivoting their career, moving to a different country, etc. And those are kind of the broad categories. What you need more than whether it's average or not is specificity. So it's not enough to say, I'd like the opportunity to work abroad. Well, what do you want to do abroad? Ideally with a few target companies. And then the layer deeper of research, which is, okay, and what do I need to get there? And then how does the MBA fill that gap? I do want to address, do you want your goals to be greatly impactful to the world? Both LBS and INSEAD have a social mission, right? So INSEAD's obviously branding that they came out with a couple of years ago is INSEAD for good, and they are thinking about how you can create positive impact in the communities that you live in. LBS is doubling down on their commitments to sustainability. So that doesn't mean that you need to think, you need to tell a story that you're going to do whatever you're going to do for the next 3 to 5 years, and then you're going to found a nonprofit. That's not everybody's goal. But I would encourage you to think about, if I achieve the things I'm setting out to achieve, how will that make other people's lives better? And I can almost guarantee you that in some way it will, if you are succeeding. And you don't need to be working in a nonprofit or founding a social enterprise for that to be true. So if you were working with a coach, that's the kind of thing that we would work on together to ideate and to say, these are your goals. What is the impact of that? Let's look at the downstream effects and how can we make that part of the story, and how can that fit into how INSEAD and LBS see their role in educating future leaders.
Yeah. Thank you. So we have a question about language, and I'm trying to find the exact question. Is the story, link, narrative, and English language more important in writing an essay, or the depth of the story itself? Ideally, it would be an amalgamation of both, but how can one balance it if the earlier narrative isn't so strong? So it's an interesting question, isn't it? How important is the quality of the writing versus the quality of the story? Melissa, could you maybe answer that one, please?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I mean, definitely the story would be more important. As you know, INSEAD and LBS are the most international business schools in the world. So, people are coming from so many different countries where English isn't their first language. So they don't expect, perfect English all of the time. But that said, you could always have someone review your essays where English is their first language, and maybe perhaps they could help out with things like grammar and whatnot. But yeah, definitely I would focus more on that cohesive story.
Yeah, absolutely. It's more about the story than it's not an essay writing competition, as we like to say sometimes. It's more about the message that you're getting across than being a Pulitzer Prize winning writer.
Yeah.
Especially if you're not a native English speaker. They do cut you some slack for that, for sure. There's an interesting question about whether there is any difference between the international schools and the American schools in essay writing and storytelling. Cassandra, given your experience, do you see any difference in expectations or style, the international schools versus the American schools?
I wouldn't say there's a lot of difference in expectation and style, but there are some nuances. So one thing I would say is, you mentioned this word humility, and it's important to be humble. And I think and that's true for all schools, but for the American schools, I think also they really need to see as well your confidence. And for some of my international clients, that is actually what they feel uncomfortable with, is really owning that confidence and what I really can do and what I really can come and achieve. And then the second thing I would say is, for most of the international schools, you do have longer to tell your story in the application. And that's another way of saying you have more words to write. There are some exceptions. If we look at ESA, for example, it's a little bit shorter, but certainly if we compare LBS and INSEAD to most of the M7 schools in the States, I mean, you just have a lot more space to tell a narrative.
One other side tip on that too. So for the international schools, so INSEAD, LBS, because one of their main criteria is your international motivation and experience, you might want to weave in a bit more of that into your essays, whereas the US schools, perhaps not so much. Sure, they value international experience, but it's not a key criteria like the other schools, the European schools.
Yeah, very good point. It's a nice to have, not a must have like it is for INSEAD and London Business School. So we have a question about extracurriculars. The question is, how is a less than serious involvement in extracurriculars looked at, and how can this be conveyed in the essay? So perhaps it's a question about, something that someone does for fun, it's a hobby, is it still relevant to their application or not? Cassandra, could you take that one?
100%. In fact, I would encourage everybody to think about what they do for fun and what makes them an interesting person to speak to at a dinner party, for example, and try to go as deep as you can here. Everybody loves to travel, but travel isn't, that compelling in a MBA application. So really do think about the things that you've committed to over time, and they don't have to be serious. They don't have to be necessarily like you've volunteered for the last 7 years doing something, or you've started your own business. What schools really like to see, all schools, and LBS and INSEAD are certainly no exceptions to this. I think they over-index on sports achievements. I've noticed they really like to see people that have some kind of physical activity in their life. This would not apply to me, so I would have to think about that. But I've noticed that. So if you're somebody who, and it doesn't necessarily have to be competitive, if you're somebody who's been playing five-a-side since you were, 12, and you've continued to do that, and you're in a community league, and you're in your a league with your work, mention that. If you've been running, a lot, mention that. If you like to hike mountains, mention that. They are really looking to see who you are as an individual. And by the way, this is one of the areas that I think people brush over, but almost everybody who applies to these schools is really great. And so you're also looking for ways in which you can differentiate yourself and be unique amongst a pool of really great candidates. And this is one of the ways that you can do it. So really think about this.
Yeah, just to add to that too, and instead of just saying running or scuba diving, what have you done? Like, where have you scuba dived? Have you done it 10 times? Have you done it 20 times? So the more information that you can reveal, the better. So it's not just kind of simple, basic, I just like to run. Have you done marathons? Have you done 10Ks? Have you, someone mentioned, a huge bike trip that they did across their country. So that's really interesting, instead of just saying cycling. I
love the INSEAD wording of this question. And whenever we're answering this type of question for any school, I try to bring this wording, which is, how are you enriched by these activities, right? That's what we want to know as well. Not just, that you do it, but why do you do it? What does it give you? How has it made you a better, more full person?
I just wanted to, there's one question that relates to this question as well. It's, if you are far removed from undergrad, you've got 9 years of work experience, should you still speak to undergrad extracurriculars? You absolutely could. I mean, as I said earlier, if you were really involved in undergrad, even though it was a long time ago, and you're president of this or on the student council, volunteering with this group, it's so good to add in, because, then the schools would see you as really getting involved with their schools too. You really kind of have to look at everything you've done. If you don't really have as much space to talk about the undergrad experience a long time ago, and you have way more, more current activities, then, you might want to stick with those. So it kind of depends on everything that you've done extracurricularly, whether it be, sports, hobbies, or volunteering or community work.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you that question. So thank you for jumping in there with that one, Melissa. That's great. So we have a question, a follow-up about our discussion on weaknesses. So one of the participants asked, what do you mean and what should students be aware about when you say be vulnerable? Couldn't this also be something that could then be used against students in their application? So Cassandra, as I think you brought up the word vulnerable, perhaps to start with, could you maybe take that one, please?
Yeah. I'm so pleased that this question was asked, because this is exactly the point I'm trying to make. Our instinct is to say, I don't want to reveal a true weakness that is genuinely a weakness, or a true failure that I really, feel like I should have done better, because that's going to be, quote, used against me. It feels counterintuitive, but it's the opposite. Provided it's appropriate and professional. I mean, it can be a personal example sometimes, but I think we're all adults here, and we know the range of what's appropriate. Showing that kind of self-reflection and ability to learn, change, and grow only strengthens your application. It really doesn't harm you in any way. It only strengthens you. And if you strengthen your application, and what harms you is by talking about a weakness or a failure that comes across as I'm trying to position a strength as a weakness, like I'm such a perfectionist, or I work too hard, or oh yeah, I had this failure that didn't really, it wasn't really my fault, or it didn't really, it wasn't consequential. That will harm you, because you will come across as somebody who isn't self-reflective enough and isn't able to learn from their mistakes and evolve as a person and as a professional.
Yeah, it is often very tricky to answer those questions, but excellent advice. Thank you, Cassandra, and very important to dig deep on those questions, and be willing to share something that's really authentic there. And admissions committees are very experienced at reading between the lines and understanding if someone is actually being honest, or if they are writing something that they think doesn't look too bad, or perhaps it's a bit of a fake weakness. So you won't fool the admissions committee. I think it's something that's important to keep in mind when you're writing your application. So we've pretty much run out of time. I wanted to thank everyone so much for your awesome questions. If we didn't have a chance to get to your particular question, please do get in touch with us at the email address on the screen. Sign up for a free consultation. I would like to thank my awesome co-hosts, panelists, Melissa and Cassandra. As I said, it's a huge pleasure to work with these wonderful coaches, colleagues, and I learn something from them every day, and I learned some things from you ladies today, so thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with everybody. So best of luck to everyone with your applications, and we hope it's been useful. So please stay in touch, and we look forward to helping you further along the path and helping you secure your place at business school. Thank you so much, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.